Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth session of the Spring 2022 Synoikis Digital Classics semester. This program is on focusing on digital approaches to cultural heritage this semester, and we've had sessions on crowdsourcing, museum data, and 3D imaging so far. This session will be on digital heritage collections, with both a focus on born digital and digitized collections. So this I think will be a really nice follow-up to all of the sessions we've had already. Anybody who's watching this live this afternoon, please feel free to use the live chat feature, which you'll see to the right or below the YouTube video, to make comments, ask questions, and join the discussion at the end of the session. And of course, please say hi. Let us know where you're watching from, even now. And we'll keep an eye open for your comments, and we can address them a bit later at the end. Anyone who's not watching this live, obviously you can't engage with the live chat, but we're always very happy to hear from you and to know what you're doing with this material. And all of the materials produced for SunoikisisDC are open licensed and are available for anybody to use in teaching and learning of any kind. So we'd again be very happy to know what you're doing with this material, but you don't have to tell us. You can just go away and use it. That's also great. Cutting to the chase, today we're hearing from Stella Wisdom from the British Library, Paula Granados García from the British Museum, and Rhiannon Lewis, who's both at the University of London and the Science Museums Group. And they're going to talk to us about various different aspects of digital heritage collections, both, as I say, born digital and digitized, and both technical and ethical and conceptual issues that arise around all of these. And we'll have a bit of a discussion at the end, as well as presenting a suggested exercise that you might all try out yourselves to create a mini exhibit from existing open collections. So there's going to be a bit of back and forth. There's going to be a general introduction, three case studies, and then some discussion of the exercise. But I will now hand over to Stella, who will start us off with a bit of general introduction.
Thanks, Gabby. Let me just share my slides. Can those be seen okay? Yes. Yes. Excellent. Right. Thanks, everyone. So I'm just going to give a bit of an introduction about digital collections. As we've mentioned, digital collections are items that have been digitized from the analog materials. So thinking digitized images of manuscripts, printed books, newspapers, maps, and sound recordings, but also born digital collections, which comprise of material that is natively created in a digital format. So this is different from the digitized analog items. And example of born digital includes personal digital archives with emails, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, images taken with digital cameras, data sets, web archives, and I'm just going to talk through some examples from the British Library as we go along. So I work at the British Library. It's the National Library of the United Kingdom. We're a legal deposit library, so we receive a copy of every publication published in the UK and Ireland. And I won't go through all these statistics, but just to say that we've got vast and complex collections in kind of huge numbers, both in the analog collections and the digital collections. And I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of case studies now. So one of our oldest digitisation projects is the International Dunwoon project, which digitizes manuscripts from the Eastern Silk Road. So I just wanted to give this as an example of a digitized manuscripts collection. And like I say, it's one of our earliest ones that was digitizing collections in the 1990s. It's also a collaboration with many other collections as a kind of virtual reunification project. So I just wanted to put a link up. Like I said, I'm going to romp through some of these examples, so bear with me. With digitizing manuscripts, what's possible is handwritten text recognition. So I've just put a link up to here, and in the British Library with our digitized Arabic manuscripts, we've been doing some cutting edge projects working out how to do handwritten text recognition and doing some experiments with our collections that we've got here. We also digitise books. An example of our book digitisation projects is the 2 Centuries of Indian Print project. And I've just put a screen grab here of Wikisource because we've been able to use digitised books with Wikisource to work with the community to crowdsource transcriptions of the book. So I've mentioned handwritten text recognition. There's also optical character recognition and kind of transcribing books and basically with digitized collections such as our digitized books collection, we're able to upload those images to Wikisource to do some community transcription, which is obviously very helpful to the library. Other mass digitisation of analogue resources includes mass newspaper digitisation. So just wanted to give a shout out to the British Newspaper Archive. This is a partnership with Find My Past, and I've put the links up here if people are interested in digitised newspapers. And going back to digitised books, I wanted to flag up a large collection of 18th and 19th century titles. So I've just put a link to the collection guide here. But this is a collection that was digitised in partnership with Microsoft. It's a vast collection of over 60,000 volumes, and these digitised images are viewable via the Universal Viewer with the IIIF standard. So when we come on to the exercise later on, we'll be talking about IIIF. Bear in mind that this digitised book collection of 19th century books is all available with the IIIF standard. And the illustrations from this book collection have been uploaded to the British Library's Flickr channel as well. So I just wanted to have a quick slide sort of explaining how we did this. So a talented ex-colleague of mine, Ben Osteen, worked out a way of algorithmically snipping out the book illustrations from this large-scale book digitization project. And then when he'd done that, we uploaded them all to Flickr, and these are all available as thematic albums on Flickr. So I've put a link so you can browse through these. I mentioned that we digitize maps. One of the large maps digitisation projects that we've been doing recently is the King's Topographical Collection. And again, we've been uploading lots of digitised maps onto the British Library's Flickr site. So there's kind of around 18,000 maps on there. We've also been digitising the globes in our cartographic collections, and there's some really nice kind of 3D globes on the library's Sketchfab channel. I know you've had a session on 3D, so I won't dwell on that. Thinking of other digital collections, not everyone realises that we have a large repository of digital PhD thesis. So Ethos is a service where we provide access to PhD theses. Earlier ones were digitised, and there's been mass digitisation of these, but obviously new intake ones are born digital, and we have been looking at multimedia PhD theses. We've still got a lot of developments to be able to collect these, but we have been kind of examining, because obviously with more PhDs by practice and students submitting digital thesis, especially PhD by practice, it's like, how can we collect these in the future? So we have been doing some case studies looking at these, and I've put some links. Moving swiftly on, because I've been speaking so far about images, but the library does have a vast sound archive, and I've put an example here of a research project called True Echoes, where we've been digitising wax cylinders from our oceanic collections. So these are some of the earliest sound recordings of anthropological researchers, and we've had this wonderful Leverhulme funded project to digitise these collections and make them available. And I've put a link to the website, so if you're interested in this, you can go and check it out. Also in our sound archive collection, we've been collecting TV and radio recordings. So I just wanted to mention the broadcast news collection. So this is where we are collecting news channels as they're recorded and providing access in the news reading room, and you can keyword search the subtitles. So this is a really interesting digital collection that we've got in the news reading room, and again I've linked to the collection guide. And now I'm just going to talk a bit about web archives. So people are thinking, well, people may know about the Internet Archive, but there are other web archives. I've just put on the slide here why we web archive. So these are different images of what the British Library's website has looked like at different points in time going back to 1996. So you can see over the years that websites look very, very different. The UK Web Archive is a consortium that we have with the other legal deposit libraries in the UK, and basically, we've been collecting websites since 2005, so quite a long time. But since 2013, we've been able to collect at scale. So under the non-print legal deposit regulations, we're able to do whole domain crawls, and we do an annual crawl trying to collect the UK web. But we also do more curated crawling, where curators will select websites, often for thematic collections, and set frequent crawls for these. So I've linked to the Web Archive Collection Guide and also the annual report if you want to read more about web archiving. And I've put here some links to, I mentioned other web archiving organisations, so the National Archives, they also archive government websites, UK Parliament Web Archive, Internet Archive, as I've mentioned, and also the International Internet Preservation Consortium. And there's a large basically consortium of different organisations that are all maintaining web archives. So it's a very collaborative field here. Going from web archiving onto other born digital collections, I just wanted to mention in our archives collections, we collect contemporary born digital manuscripts and archives. This is a growing collection, so around 4 terabytes at the moment. We collect all sorts of individuals' personal archives, whether it's novelists or poets, politicians, scientists, social scientists, activists, and often these are hybrid archives. So we're getting their kind of analog paper archives as well as their digital files, and basically material can arrive at the library on all sorts of formats. So zip drives, floppy disks, CD-ROMs, laptops, you name it. And I've linked to a colleague's blog post about the work we do in this area. I'm going to go through these very fast, but these are some of the individuals whose born digital archives that we have in the library. And again, I'm not going to go in detail in this about the workflow here, but we use digital forensics software to basically appraise the material that comes in on hard drives and other material, and also to flag up sensitive contents that we need to be careful about, including obviously passwords and financial information. We do visual checks of the carriers too, and if things look like they're commercial software that have come in, we return those back to the donors. And then once something has become, like I say, acquired by the library, that's when we do a capture with the Spectre software, and it's captured in an ISO format. And basically, we then use the British Library's digital preservation. We work with them and make captures at bit level using Chiroflux, and then add these to the minimum preservation tool for backup and like I say, regular checking. And then the actual carriers themselves are moved to long-term storage once we've taken the digital files off them. I also wanted to mention, with the Born Digital Archives, we're also doing research into enhanced curation. So this is panoramic footage of the writer Qureshi's writing study. So we've taken in an archive of this writer, and we've got many born digital drafts of novels, but we've also got panoramic footage of the writing study. So this is a flat image that you can see here, but if you do go onto the link that I've put on the slide, you can pan up and down and side to side and see the kind of writing environment. So for researchers trying to understand these collections in the future, this resource should be very useful to them. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope you found that useful.
Thanks, Stella. That's great. Yeah. Cool. I'll hand over to Paula now, who I think is going to give us a different perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. Thanks, Stella. That was really interesting and really useful to hear. So I'm going to share my screen and going to slide mode, if that works. Is it working? Because I cannot see.
Yes, it is.
Great. So I will be talking about digital collections and digital curation a bit more specifically from my own perspective at EMKP. And then I will go, I will move then into the specific case study, into EMKP, the issues we are facing, the challenges, and also some of the technical responses that we have given to these challenges. So just to start very quickly, what do I mean by digital curation? Well, this is kind of the official definition, the management and preservation of digital objects, data, information over the long term. And it involves maintaining, preserving, and adding value to digital research data throughout its life cycle. And by digital objects, as Stella has mentioned, we refer to digitized objects or digital-born objects as well. So, however, that definition is a bit broad, and I wanted to kind of speak a bit more about my own experience and the kind of things that I am involved with in my day-to-day work at EMKP. And in my perspective, this has these three different aspects. So in the first place, the idea of preservation, which is perhaps, in my perspective, the most technical one, and it has to do with things like data ingestion and digitization, thinking about data management plans, data selection and collection, and in the long term as well, eventually thinking about ethics and licensing, which also involves open access research and open data principles, which I think we've mentioned them already. The FAIR principles, which stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. Then we go into the aspect of curation as well, which involves perhaps more taking care of the collection. So that involves digital repository management, data accessibility, facilitating the appropriate degree of access to the users, because not all the users need the same sort of access, and the institution itself or the digital repository manager also needs to reflect and control the kind of access provided. Data preservation and maintenance, and also in this curation aspect, we should also talk about mitigating digital obsolescence. So if we, for example, have a digital collection and we are using URLs or permanent identifiers, we need to make sure that those exist for as long as the collection is available, making sure they work. And finally, the aspect of dissemination, which is also really interesting. It has to do more with sharing and accessibility of the collection. It is related to editorial work as well, digital exhibitions, promotion and valorization of both the digital assets and the collection itself. And also it has to do a lot, at least in our perspective in EMKP, with non-specialist engagement. How can we bring broader audiences to our content, and how can we kind of democratize the access to it? First, I wanted to talk a bit about the challenges of digital collections in general, to then move into more specifically related to EMKP. So in my perspective, although digital collections have been around for a while, and libraries and archives have been thinking about how to better give access and preserve digital collections from the early 90s, still there are no clear shared workflows for the curation of digital objects. Although there are many different projects that Stella has mentioned some, we have Open GLAM, so there are all these ideas coming up, but there are not kind of specified a clear workflow. Also, after COVID, this has become more urgent, because collections are emerging, and in some cases they don't have a clear action or preservation plan. In some cases, there is little previous experience in the musealization of those digital objects and in the collection, in the curation of them as well. And also because these items have very specific particular characteristics, because they are ephemeral, they are socially constructed, and therefore it makes it extremely difficult to capture some of them in a kind of a memory institution. Others, obviously, they don't have a material dimension, and there is as well this tension between how we can provide access but at the same time manage control of the collection, which is one of the main issues of big institutions and data sharing. So what do we do in EMKP? I'm not going to be going longer or explaining about the EMKP, because we mentioned it already in the museums data session this term. But just as you know, it is a granting program, re-granting program based at the British Museum, funded by Arcadia, and it provides grants for projects documenting material knowledge systems that are under threat or in danger of disappearing. The projects then are required to produce detailed documentation of the project processes and practices involved. And I showed you some of these pictures before, but just to explain what we mean by material knowledge. When we see an object in a museum, such as, for example, this instrument that they are producing here, the mouth harp, we tend to just identify the object, its materiality, its physicality, and sometimes we lost the context of it. So what we're trying to capture with EMKP is all this knowledge that's around the object itself, how it was made, by whom it was made, how it was used by the community, and in this case, as we are talking about an instrument, for example, how it was played, what sound it made. So that's the kind of material knowledge that we are trying to document, because in many of the cases is practices that are disappearing. So how can we kind of capture this knowledge and preserve it in a digital repository? So just to give you a little idea about the scope, so far we have granted 50 projects in 35 different countries. And we are giving each year, we give between 20 and 30 grants. So that's going to be building into a very large data set. So all the records from grantees must be digital. They need to provide digital records of this documentation, and they are hosted in an open access repository owned by the British Museum. And it's going to be, the idea is to preserve these for future generations to remember and learn. So now, most interesting bit in my perspective, what are the challenges that EMKP as a digital program, which aims to build a digital collection and a digital repository, is facing? I think there are three main issues, or four main issues that we should that I should mention that I'm going to discuss today. In the first place, we have the issue of the bulk digital content and the large quantities of data that we have to work with. As I mentioned, every project we grant in between 20 and 30 every year, we grant between 20 and 30 projects, and that is producing a large amount of information and data that we need to process, and we need to upload to this repository. Therefore, this is a significantly large collection of digital assets to store and preserve. So the first issue is kind of the size of the data set. The second issue is, of course, ethical considerations. Now, ethical considerations are absolutely paramount for EMKP, and this is not anything new to some of you, because we have already spoken about issues around intellectual property ownership or digital assets. But here in our program, we are dealing with something that's a little more specific, and that varies according to the community's practices and the community's sensitivities. So it is essential to recognize the specific and the compelling needs of communities around data control and access. For example, if it is knowledge that the community considers secret, that they want to preserve, but not necessarily open to everybody under an open access license, that's the sort of things that we really need to care about and put in place the right protocols to make sure that we are compliant with these requirements. Next issue is an appropriate way or workflow for data collection and management. And so we have to kind of balance the need for rigorous and robust data management systems that, as I said, ensure long-term preservation and usability, and also interoperability, reflecting indigenous or community-generated knowledge systems. So, for example, naming conventions need to be closely considered. And in terms of metadata requirements, for example, looking at local languages, how can we produce bilingual metadata, and so on. All those issues are important. And finally, looking into the future. So all these projects that are starting to deliver their data sets to us and submitting their documentation, they are building a really, really large repository that we need to manage, and we are looking always to ways on how we can make it accessible to normal academic audiences, but also to non-traditional audiences, including communities, knowledge holders, who may not be so familiar with the grammar or the procedure to access a digital repository such as the one we are building. That's paramount to us as well. And so very quickly going into technical responses to these challenges. So how we are responding to this. Just to say, this is an organic process. We are working on it. We are building it every day. It's dynamic. We listen to the user needs. We listen to the grantee needs. And so it is a work in progress. We are always looking at ways to improve our workflows. So first, to the issue of born digital content and large quantities of data, we answer to that question by providing support for a varied range of media in all non-proprietary formats. It is a grantee and the team who decide how they want to document that specific practice because of its specific characteristics and circumstances. Also, we provide large storage capacity to preserve and provide accessibility to the data. And a way to deal with these issues is by bulk upload. We're currently using a general user interface that's called Fixture Uploader to upload all this data to the repository because it's a large data set. Second, ethical consideration to make sure we check the data properly. We are putting in place, or we have put in place, this a robust workflow to manage data and assessed by the team prior to the ingest and publication in the repository. And also, as I said, because some of the information does not necessarily need to be open to everybody, we have mechanisms for access restriction, such as embargoes, that allow us to look at the different levels and care for the different levels of knowledge that can be accessed by the different groups and the different users. So, as I said, licensing, cultural sensitivities, access restriction, and rights ownership. That are the four main things that we are considering. In terms of data access, as I said, we mentioned already the FAIR principles, which are paramount to us, but this needs to be kind of combined with core principles, which look after the collective benefit and the indigenous and the community control over the data. And also for sure GDPR compliance and personal information regulations. Next, appropriate data collection and management. The way we are dealing with this issue is by developing a metadata schema that's helping us collect the data in the way we want and collect the information that we want. And we developed this schema because of some prior discontent towards the schemas available, because either they were too object focused or too museum focused, or for whatever reason, they were not necessarily the best schema for us to document ethnographical and anthropological projects. And so we developed this EMKP metadata schema. That's a new ad hoc metadata schema tailored for the project needs. And it allows us to collect the assets with information that goes beyond what we can see in the video or the audio or whatever asset we are collecting. It provides very important information about the creator, the licenses, the community involved, the participants, and all that. It is multilingual, as I said. We are always encouraging the team to record information in the local language. so that we can also enable the searches in the repository in different languages, not just English. And it also preserves community understandings of place, space, time, because collecting all this contextual information is what allows us to preserve the community understandings of the asset and the knowledge that we are collecting. So that was my presentation. Thank you. And I hope to discuss all these later, all these issues that I mentioned.
Lovely, thank you, Paula. That's great. Cool. So yes, as mentioned before, we're happy to take questions and comments. Please do leave comments in live chat, and we'll pick them up afterwards. But I think now we're going back to Stella for the next case study.
Yep. Thanks, Gabby. So I'm assuming that you can see my second slide deck about collecting emerging formats. So building on from what I was talking about before, I'm going to dive into a specific case study about born digital collecting. People often ask, what are emerging formats, which is a very good question to ask about this collection. So at the British Library, so basically my disclaimer is this is our definition at the British Library. We see emerging formats as born digital and without a print counterpart. They may consist of more than one media type. Often there are non-standard format and metadata types. They're not typically part of our existing collections, but they are very much at risk of rapid obsolescence. So this is kind of challenging material. So the emerging formats work that we do at the library is part of UK non-print legal deposits. So we've had legal deposit legislation in the UK for a long time, but digital legal deposit came in 2013, and it's been since then that we've really been empowered, I suppose is the right word to use, to collect publications in digital formats, and publishers are obligated to provide digital files suitable for long-term preservation, but access is on site in reading rooms at any of the legal deposit libraries' reading rooms, so they can't be accessed online. So with the emerging formats work that we've been doing so far, we've been focusing on two areas. One is books as mobile apps, and the other is web-based interactive narratives. And this is a picture of my colleague, Julia Carlo Rossi, who is curator of digital publications with one of the apps that we have collected. So the pioneering collecting methods we've been trying, a file transfer with agreement from the publishers, where therefore, like I say, the publisher gives us access to their files. We're also looking at download via an access code, again with cooperation from publishers, but that does have digital rights issues. And thirdly, web harvesting. So the one main benefit of web harvesting is that we have the UK Web Archive and its crawlers. So we've got a methodology and tools and capability to do some experiments with this. But another disclaimer is we might not be able to do complete captures of works, and I will talk a bit more about this. So I mentioned looking at collecting narrative apps. 80 Days is an example of this. So the library has worked with Inkle Studios in Cambridge. They've been very, very helpful, giving us access to their source code, all sorts of contextual information, and we've been preserving and kind of collecting these files. It's not available in the reading rooms yet, but we're doing a lot of work with this as a kind of pilot study to help us understand how to collect more works of this nature. I'm going to talk now about a project done by Linda Clark. So Linda Clark was a postdoctoral researcher at the British Library in 2019. She was funded by an AHRC innovation placement. And Linda worked with the library to build a thematic special collection in the UK Web Archive. So this is our interactive narratives collection. It's part of our e-publishing trends and emerging formats umbrella collection, and she collects collected different types of work, so hypertext fiction, parser-based, choice-based, and she did some experiments of capturing both with Heritrix, which is our main crawler that we do use for the annual Web Archive crawl, but also Web Recorder, which enables you to capture browser sessions, and this can kind of capture the kind of experience that the user has when kind of exploring a work. So it basically, what I should also mention is Web Recorder. There has been a split with development, so there is also Conifer, which is also a crawler, which enables you to kind of capture interactive sessions. The W3 Act tool is an in-house UK Web Archive tool that curators use to build collections and kind of build collections. So we use all these tools with web archiving in the British Library. Heritrix as the main automatic large scale crawler, Web Recorder for like I say, capturing more complex and interactive websites, and Act to build thematic collections. So with emerging formats collecting, I suppose one of the first challenges is actually identifying works, and there's probably what we found out from doing having some discussions and focus studies is that there is actually a low awareness that we are doing this work with researchers and publishers and creators. And furthermore, there's no comprehensive directory of works. They're subject to rapid technological changes. So it's almost like trying to find out what to collect and where from is a challenge for the library from the get-go, really. So how we've been approaching this is to build networks of contacts with publishers and creators, to engage with research communities and other professionals to share knowledge and kind of learn from people as well, and to participate in the interactive narrative and digital media communities. And an example of doing of this type of engagement is actually sometimes with kind of creative projects such as online game jams. I just wanted to mention Gothic Novel Jam. So I run this online game jam in 2018, encouraging the interactive fiction community to create works using 19th century book collections that I mentioned in my first talk today. And we received, I thought, quite a healthy level of submission. So we had kind of 46 entries from all around the world, and really it's by engaging with creators and writers that we get to kind of discover what people are doing and build some of these connections. Many writers who create interactive narratives often use tools such as Twine. So Twine is an open source tool for telling interactive stories. I've just put a link up here. You can download it, but you can also use it in a browser as well. So it's actually a great tool for using at events, because you just need a browser and anyone can start creating a Twine story. So I mentioned the challenges of identifying works, but there's also many challenges of collecting the works it's themselves as well. So users probably expect us to be able to collect complete copies that will stay complete in the future and can be accessed in a meaningful way, such as retaining the authentic experience and original context. However, there are challenges with kind of, I suppose, collecting different versions of the same publication. So with apps and digital publications, often there will be updates, additional content added, changes to it. They may render differently in different browsers. So there's hardware and software dependencies, and as I've mentioned, digital rights management as well. So with some works, there might be free content, but then there might be content behind a paywall, which we can't capture in the UK Web Archive. We can only collect things available on the kind of open public web. So we might end up with partial captures. So our approach to this is a kind of mixed approach to collecting, and if there are issues collecting full work in itself, we are looking at what contextual information we can also collect. So I'll give some examples, but this could include kind of reviews, blog posts, press packs, interviews. There might be kind of other born digital web-based content about a publication that we can collect if we can't fully collect a publication in itself. And we're also making notes of what we can't collect as well, so that we do have records of this. So as I've mentioned, we're calling this kind of collecting of additional descriptive material enhanced curation, and this is very much in kind of early days where we're developing this. It's like I say, it could include all sorts of things, but we are looking at kind of screenshot images, videos, trailers, all sorts of things, just to in the future it's like to kind of help provide this context. And I should flag up at the moment, actually, we are advertising for 2 PhD placement students. So if you're listening to this at the moment, we've got adverts up on our PhD placement page on the British Library's website, and we are looking for 2 students to do some short-term projects looking at enhanced curation with these born digital collections. So on to some of the works that we've been experimenting capturing. I wanted to mention a ghost story by called Breathe by Kate Pullinger. Kate Pullinger is a professor at Bath Spa University. This is a mobile website, so you can see from the images here what it looks like looking at the work on a browser on a mobile phone, but you can also play the work in a browser on a desktop, which is how we've captured it in the UK Web Archive. What's interesting about this work is it uses data feeds of weather data and location data and things like that. So it's a story that personalizes itself to the reader. It can, if you have location switched on your phone, it can tell where you are. So there's parts of the narrative, and it will recognize your location, and that will be built into the text. So you can see here on the slide where it says where I am here in London, West London, Shepherd's Bush. So that has picked up, that's altered the text in the story there, because that's where the reader of this is at the time, and it will be able to tell whether people are warm or cold. What's a challenge for us is if we only have one capture, it's we're recording one experiences of this work, whereas, like I say, it is a kind of tailored work depending on where people are and what the weather is like. So trying to be able to let researchers in the future know that that's part of the work is a kind of a challenge for us. Another work is a dictionary of the revolution. I've put links to these so people can have a look. So this is a kind of interactive data visualization, and this is a flat image on my slide, but when you go into the work, you can click on any of these topics around the side and it takes you into different parts of the work. So that's interesting. Another work that uses data feeds that I've mentioned this is a picture of wind by J.R. Carpenter. So this is using kind of wind data from the Met Office. So again, a kind of challenge for the legal deposit libraries when we're trying to capture emerging formats is this is work that, like I say, is using live data feeds. And if in the future you've not it's you've got to capture, but it's kind of captured what the experience was at that point in time. Whereas, like I say, this is meant to be a work that's using live data feeds. So Linda built this collection. She did quite a lot of analysis on it, including of genre, and she wrote some interesting blog posts about these. It's you can see from the pie chart, actually there was quite a lot of different genres in the collection that she built. It wasn't just kind of one type of thing. Yeah, it's I won't dwell on this. She also built a creative work using Twine herself whilst doing the postdoc project with us, and this is called The Memory Archivist. It's quite interesting to play The Memory Archivist because she used the findings from her research project to inform the narrative of this story. So it is a very, very meta work. I should also mention that my colleague Julia, who I showed in an earlier photo, we collected some works made using a tool called Bitsy. Bitsy, like Twine, is a kind of free open source browser-based game creating tool, but rather than creating interactive hyperlinked text stories like Twine does, Bitsy creates kind of quite retro pixelated looking kind of browser-based mini games, so you can add text in. And during the first COVID lockdown, Julia built the British Library Simulator, so basically an online explorable version of the British Library, where you can go in, buy a coffee, learn about the web archive and other things. So I do urge you to go and check this out and kind of have a bit of a virtual explore of the British Library built in Bitsy. Building on, so Linda's project, building the thematic collection of interactive narratives, is really a kind of start of a journey for us. And since then, we have built a special thematic collection in the UK Web Archive. This is the shortlisted and winning works of the New Media Writing Prize. So this is a writing prize that's been running for about 12 years now, led by Bournemouth University. And recently, in the last year, we've hosted another PhD placement. I've mentioned PhD placement. So Tegan Pike has just completed a placement with us, and she has been doing quality assurance of the captures in the New Media Writing Prize collection. So kind of looking at the captures and assessing how much has kind of rendered correctly, what the issues are. And she's written a detailed report that I've put a link to in the British Library repository. So if I've sparked your interest to kind of want to maybe read some more examples of these kind of web-based interactive narratives, some of the ones I've mentioned plus some others are on this list. I've mentioned Bitsy work, so The Garden of Forking Paths by Richard A. Carter, that's another Bitsy work. There's some older work, so Galatea by Emily Short is a well-known work of interactive fiction. So I've just put some kind of links up here that if you I've sparked your interest and you want to check out some of these works. So thank you very much, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Stella. That's great. There's a whole another conversation we could have about IF, but we'll maybe another time. So okay, great. So we've heard a lot now about the Born Digital collections. We're going to hear a bit more now from Rhiannon about digitized collections and some of the really exciting things you can do with these collections. So over to you, Rhiannon. You're still muted.
I'll just unmute myself. Thank you, Gabby. Right, I slideshow, enter slideshow. Perfect. Hi, I'm Rhiannon Lewis. I'm a digital humanities PhD candidate based between Science Museum Group and School of Advanced Studies. So thank you for having me to talk on the Digital Heritage Collections Week. As Gabby said, I'm going to be talking about digitized collections. So I'm going to start by talking about what we mean by digitized museum collections. I'm then going to mostly draw on a Science Museum Group case study, as this is the focus of my PhD. I'm going to be talking about digital images of collection objects and how these can be hosted both on and off the various platforms of the museum. And I'm also going to be talking a little bit about digitized collections beyond digital images, but I'll be focusing mostly on digital images because they are the focus of my PhD research. So before I jump into that, just to discuss what we mean by digitized museum collections. So digitized collections differ from digital collecting in that it has a physical referent in an object or artifact or painting, or as Stella was talking about, manuscripts. National museums have been digitizing their collections since the 1990s, and it's a process that involves a lot of money, labor, and time that isn't always, that often goes unseen and is ongoing. Sometimes these digitized museum objects can be called digital surrogates. And sometimes I've heard museum professionals working in the sector refer to digital surrogates. Academic Fiona Cameron, in describing the origins of the term, describes how the surrogate, once created, becomes a copy of the material life history of the original, rather than the original copy's materiality. Its visual similarity to the historical narrative of the original object. There is some debate about using the term digital surrogates as like the go-to term to describe digitized collection objects, with some academics, including Cameron, not favouring it because it reinforces object copy binaries, and the digital surrogate becomes an expression of the physical object's authenticity. And if you frame it in this way, the copy lacks its own autonomy. But yeah, not all digitization of collection objects is done by museums, and I'll be exploring that today. And a digitized collection object can take many forms. So this is an intro to that, and it's by no means exhaustive. So it's just a quick intro. Oh, this is a bibliography for anyone interested in debates around discussion around digital surrogates, ideas of authenticity and how that relates to digitized collections. So to jump in with my case study, the Science Museum Group, it consists of 5 museums: Locomotion, the Railway Museum in York, the Science and Media Museum in Bradford, the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, and the Science Museum in London. Then there's 2 further collection sites, one in Blythe House in London and the National Collection Centre in Wroughton. The collection covers many types of objects, from you've got ethnographic objects, there's medical collections, there's spacecrafts, there's looms, industrial objects, as well as photography and even television sets. It's a broad and wide-ranging collection, but even though it's over these different sites, the museum conceptualizes their collection as a whole, and that is how I approach it in my PhD research. So my PhD research is currently titled Collections as Networked Images, the use and reuse of the Science Museum Group's collections in the form of digital images through social media. So yeah, I'm looking at how the use and reuse of digital images of the collection on social media expands upon or creates a new recontextualization for the objects that are being shared. I'm looking into types of collection object, as well as types of image that are being shared, and I'm going to pull on some examples that I've come across in my PhD research, through which I have identified 2 types of images. So newly created, those that have been taken by visitors to the museum and then shared through social media. And this is what I'm talking about with digitization of collections not having to happen exclusively by museums, and then existing digital images produced by the museum and then shared online. So it's this one that I want to explore with you first. So just a little introduction to collections photography. Here we have a wooden figure of St. Barbara in the Science Museum collection. And you might be familiar with the aesthetic of collections photography often used by museums. On the left is a photo showing the process done by a professional with quite a high-spec camera. You've got the object is very much the focus, and there tends to be this neutral background. This then often translates to collections online pages, or indeed online exhibitions, but I just want to focus a little bit
on collections online to show the use of the digital image and how that the use of the digital images in collections online setting. So just going to start with a example of a drain cover, and I hope that you can follow me through from my presentation to, I've clicked onto the drain in collections online. Can everyone see that? I hope you can see that. Okay, cool. So just to show here how the Roman drain cover is existing on collections online. I know that a few weeks ago there was discussions around metadata and collection objects. So I just wanted to show how digitization and digital images are existing on collections online. And so you've got the title, you've got the digital image, you've got some description of the object, and then you've got some other tombstone information, how it relates to the collection, the object number, and then what will be, which Stella will explain further later, but you've also got further links to how the object can feature off the sites of the Science Museum. So this object is IIIF enabled, and you can view it in a universal viewer, which will be explained further later, but I just wanted to show how the collection object is featuring over different sites. So back into the presentation. Yeah, so platforms of interest for my PhD research on social media were Pinterest and Twitter. And I was interested in Pinterest as a site of sharing existing digital images and how these collection photography images were shared through Pinterest. So Pinterest is an image-based social media platform for image discovery and curation. Digital images exist as pins that can then be collected onto boards. The focus of the presentation isn't to talk about my methods of collection for my PhD research, but I used a mix of analytics and their API to use to track pins that were being shared with a Science Museum webpage URL that was coming through from the webpage. So here we see Science Museum objects that have been digitized by the museum, repurposed by other people through social media to their own Pinterest board or section of a Pinterest board, and being engaged with by others through those boards. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about newly created digital images, those that are taken by visitors to the museum and then shared through social media. So you might be aware of Twitter. Twitter is a microblogging platform where users can share media and text in the form of tweets. It has a huge turnover of content, and this content that can be discovered through users' feeds and search functions. Now, Twitter was a place for sharing existing images that the Science Museum had digitized themselves, but equally it was a place where I found that images were, digital images were an accessible collections reproduction photography that people could do themselves with a digital camera or with a camera on their phone, and then they could share these through Twitter and reflect on their own and reflect their experience of that object. But as I said, and actually as was experienced through Pinterest and Twitter, the museum platforms aren't the only platforms that the museum objects feature on. So I believe there was some talk about Wikipedia in the the crowdsourcing week. So museum objects can also feature, and the Science Museum objects indeed do feature, as digital images represented on Wikipedia pages as Wikimedia images. So in light of people taking their own photos of museum objects, I just wanted to highlight this example from the James Watson Wikipedia page on the double helix DNA model. We can see on the right-hand side a larger version of what we see in the Wikipedia page, which is a user has gone to the Science Museum, taken a photo of the DNA model made by Crick and Watson, building on the work of Rosalind Franklin, and they have posted it to Wikipedia, and it's now part of the Wikipedia page on that. But it's not only people uploading their own images on Wikipedia that are featuring as part of this. So the Science Museum has been working with a Wikimedian in residence, and other objects from the collection are now being uploaded, and as you can see, with a CC BY license here, and they're featuring, this is a pair of miniature ear trumpets, which features on a Wikipedia page about ear trumpets. So yeah, also just to highlight other areas and ways that digital images of the collection is being featured. So this Google Arts and Culture online exhibition features, yes, so I hope you can also see this as I've clicked out of the presentation. So yeah, this features the Le Trésor des Trésors. I'm sorry, my French accent is terrible, but it's an illustrated notebook from the archives, and Google Arts and Culture, something that hosts collections from all over the world, from different arts and heritage organizations. They have almost collections online pages, but then they also have these exhibitions which use digital images of the collection, hosted here on Google Arts and Culture, and they produce digital exhibitions. So this one is featuring close-ups from the notebook, but then also other items in the collection. So yes, but digital images are not the only way to digitize a collection. So there's already been a session on 3D photogrammetry and 3D objects, but I just wanted to highlight how the Science Museum has been producing their own 3D photogrammetry models. There are, as you can see from the website, 49, which is a fraction of the collection, but these are ones that the museum have produced themselves and then are being hosted on Sketchfab. I mean, as the session on photogrammetry discussed, these 3D images don't necessarily need to be produced by the museum. They can be produced by other people, but I just wanted to highlight that there are a number of items from the collection that are being that are available on Sketchfab, and that are also hosted on the Science Museum's website. So I just wanted, and now that I'm doing more than one thing at a time, this may take a while to load, so I'm sorry, we all have to enjoy the loading bar together. But when it's done, which will be very soon, hopefully, we can enjoy here we go, the 3D version of this ceramic leeches jar. So as shown in other weeks, that it's annotated and describes various bits of the object. And on this one, you can see from the lid, the I mean, I'm impressed by the quality of this one, but equally you can also see with this one the digitized leeches, which are going into the leech jar. So yes, so digitization doesn't just need to be 3D images. And with that in mind, it doesn't just need to be digital images, it can be 3D visualizations, but also I just wanted to finish by talking about application programming interfaces, or APIs. The Science Museum has a JSON format application programming interface, which is open. But APIs allow for readable, machine-readable representation of museum collection objects. It allows developers and organizations to make their own collections interfaces, or researchers to use and interrogate raw data around the collection. It contains tombstone information, those things around like material, title, date, collection area, the things that I highlighted before from the Roman drain example. And actually this is JSON from the Roman drain example. But yeah, just to highlight that this is a machine readable way of representing collections that can lead to other ways of digitizing the collection that could be visual, as there is multimedia information in here. But yeah, so thank you so much for hearing about my PhD and Science Museum case study. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rhiannon. That's great. Yeah, just a reminder to people watching live that we can take questions and or comments if you just leave them in the live chat. Obviously, if people post spam to the live chat, we do have the ability to stomp on that immediately, as I have done just a minute ago. But I'll just say that sort of in preparation for the discussion, which we'll be having in a minute. But first, we're going to talk about a proposed exercise. Stella's going to show us a very simple to use online exhibit creation tool.
Excellent. So I'm going to use my browser. So let's see how this goes. I just wanted to show, so this is a browser-based tool called Exhibit. It's been built by the University of St Andrews. In fact, I understand that they built it again during the time of the pandemic. And basically, this is a tool that enables people to create their own online digital exhibitions, and it uses IIIF standards. So that's first of all, what I think we should do is just have a quick look at some examples. So I'm just going to go on the exhibit showcase page. What do we want to look at? Oh gosh, should we look at the fossils? That's again, I've got a bit of a loading issue, so we'll all wait for it to load. So here, this is a 3D object of a fossil, and with Exhibit, it's created so that you can click through and look at different aspects of the digitized item and see kind of some interpretation text relating to this, and you can zoom in and zoom out. That's it can also use different items. So we went back from the fossil onto then a photo of the fossil collector, I'm assuming. Yeah, found by Mr. Spencer, you can see here. And then you can go back and forth between multiple items, or back and forth between two items. So what I was going to propose that I do next, so if I go, that's another example. If I go back to the front homepage, we'll attempt to make one ourselves, and we're going to create a new exhibit. I'm going to cheat and use the lovely drain cover. So we looked at the drain cover here on the Science Museum's website. As Rhiannon mentioned, this is IIIF. You can see when you scroll down, you can see that there are IIIF manifests for this. So I've got one of those loaded as well. Here we go. So here's the same item, the same drain cover from the Science Museum collections looking through the universal viewer. To then get your manifest to use in the exhibit tool, if you hover over the share button and press the share button, and then you'll see it's quite small, but in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the little IIIF logo. So then if you click that and then opens a manifest. Now I'm going to zoom in on this because I appreciate that this is probably quite small on your screen. So let's zoom in here. Is that visible enough, Gabby?
That's perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. So what I'm going to do is you then just need to find the URL for the manifest, and I'm hoping this will work, and copy it. I'm hoping I'm going to click back on the right. I have. That's good. I've clicked back on the right tab. So let's just type in some details. So I should have copied this first of all. I'm just going to copy and paste because this is not a collection item I'm familiar with. So I'm just going to type this in. These are not serious details. It's just to give us an example. Say a Roman drain cover. We have to confirm that we're not a robot and agree to the T's and C's, then create the exhibit. That hasn't added the item yet, so then you see this button at the bottom left where you click add item, and this is where you then paste in the manifest. So let me find my manifest page. So there we go. I'll copy this manifest, paste it into here, and click import. That has then created, linked up with the manifest and added the image in, and then you can start adding bits about it. So like I say, so let's just write any text, like I say. So this drain cover. I know this is in the title, but because I don't have additional information at the moment, so we could say it dates from and then you press the plus sign and it's added that information, and you just keep adding items and adding stages. The benefit with this, because it uses IIIF standards, is the items don't all have to be from the same institution or the same collection. So in terms of kind of creating an exhibit, you can, as long as they're from IIIF enabled collections, you can add them in from multiple sources. Now I've not got any handy other drain covers at the moment, but should I be brave and add something that's completely not connected to the drain cover, just to show that we can add things from different collections. So I've got a manuscript here. Let's see, is that the right link? I'm going off piste here. So I've got a manuscript here from the National Library of Wales. Again, IIIF collection item. I will zoom in again here. This JSON is a bit more complicated than the Science Museum. Can I find the manifest link? Here we go. It's normally on the second line, and you look for the ID, and it's normally like this second line. Let's try and add an item in. Ooh. Fail. Sorry, everyone. This is because I was being too bold. Right, I will. Sorry, everyone. I tested it with the drain cover, but not adding another item. But basically, it like I say, this is a kind of beta version, and there might be manifests that this doesn't work. But what you should be able to do is find IIIF enabled items and then create your own exhibits. And there are many examples. So I pointed to the kind of showcase page that we looked at here, but my colleagues at the British Library, I can share the link to a blog post. So my colleagues on a project called Heritage Made Digital have made a number of them themselves, and I've linked to in this blog post. So I've got one here using our Ethiopic manuscript collections, and you can kind of look at examples. So what I suggest is having a look at examples that people have created already, and then having a go at making your own. And I'm sorry that yeah, like I say, that demo partially worked, but maybe not fully worked. But yes, I hope that's given a kind of taste. And I'd be really interested to see what exhibits people make, so you can make them and then share them. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what people do.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, that would be great if people want to. So this is a sort of suggestion for anyone who wants to go. Obviously, my students, this is not optional. You will do this, but anyone else, if you want to also, create an exhibit using this tool, finding various IIIF manifests. There's a few suggestions that Stella's given, and that are also on the session page, which is linked in the text immediately beneath this YouTube video. Then share your exhibit. Afterwards, it's publicly visible. You can share the URL in. There's an issue section on the session page, and we'll be collecting links there to exhibits that people have made. So share them. It'd be great. We'd love to look at them and comment on each other's and so forth. That would be really good. Also, be thinking when you're creating this exhibit about what sort of information you're putting in there, for what audience, what data, what metadata, what you're going to do with the image, all that sort of thing. This is, building on what we talked about 2 weeks ago. Think critically about what you're putting in here, as well as what is in the existing ones. Look at some of the other examples that Stella showed on the exhibit page, and see what sort of information they're including. And what other metadata can you find also in that page, including links back to the original exhibits that these are taken from. So that's great. I think that's really cool. We have now one question so far in the chat from Eden. This is a question for Stella. Do you think the move away from ad-based to subscription-based web content that's therefore paywalled is causing a problem for the sort of archiving tools you've been talking about?
Yeah, paywalls are a massive problem. We can only web archive in the UK Web Archive under legal deposit legislation. We can only collect the kind of open public web. So anything behind passwords and paid for subscriptions is a massive issue for us, and I don't quite know what the answer to that is. Yeah, it would probably be a different form of collection. It might even be, I mentioned the Born Digital archives that we collect in our archives and manuscripts. So if something becomes private rather than public, so we see what's on the open web as being publicly available, it might be working with creators to then privately collect something, with them kind of working with us, a bit like how I mentioned Inkle Studio worked for. So that is a paid for app. So 80 Days is a paid for app, but because they understood why we were wanting to collect and archive their work, they kind of collaborated with us and gave us access to collections to take in at the library. So yes, this is an ongoing challenge.
So there's not a legal requirement for people producing, say, an ebook as an app for them to deposit that with the British Library, as there would be if they created a print book.
There could be. We could claim that. We could do that. What is difficult is if we're wanting to cooperate and have people who want to work with us, threatening people is probably not the best approach. So we would sooner, technically, legally, we probably could demand the files, but because we're kind of learning about this area and wanting people to kind of be enthused and interested, and also want to have their works archived in the British Library, and we are trying this kind of to encourage people to cooperate with us, and that includes other types of publications. So we're doing a lot of work with comics and digital comics and web comics. I recently went with some colleagues up to Thought Bubble Comic Convention in Harrogate last autumn, and we had a stand at the convention, whereas instead of selling comics, we were actually collecting comics. So we were collecting physical comics at that convention, but we were telling people that we collected digital too, and we're trying to kind of be ambassadors to let creators know that we are kind of collecting this type of works, and sometimes it comes as a complete surprise to them. So I hope that's answered the question, but I think there is a bigger issue for all web archives of kind of paywalled content.
I mean, I guess web archives generally aren't claiming that every single byte that has ever been on the web for however short an amount of time will be preserved in perpetuity, right? So there's always, you're collecting something, not everything.
Archives are always partial. Everything we've got people, they're always partial, and it's what you can collect at the time. I suppose the other issue is kind of dynamic databases on websites as well. So the other another thing that kind of web crawlers can't crawl is if you've got embedded dynamic databases. So that is also another big challenge if people think that they might think their website's being crawled, but maybe if it's got an embedded database, then the database won't be. And again, it's trying to work out another mechanism if that needs to be preserved for the future.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Stella, I was wondering how you were dealing with emulation with the interactive fiction example you were speaking about. Is it currently? Do you have examples that are currently accessible? And how are you sort of preserving that initial user experience?
We haven't been using emulators with what we've been collecting so far.
Okay.
But obviously many institutions are using emulators, especially for older collections. There can be quite a lot of legal issues, which I've probably not got time to go into. So the legality of kind of emulators, but the Internet Archive, who probably have a bit of a different approach to legality compared to the British Library, they did put a lot of retro games available through an emulator. So emulators are important, but what we've been collecting is we've not been running through emulators.
I guess an emulator just takes the problem back one step anyway, right? Because I mean, that then has to be preserved and has to remain functional, and yeah.
I could mention, like I say, it becomes almost like then the preservation of the emulator. I should mention we have been using the web archive to capture viruses, so digital computer viruses, and that is actually quite important if we are wanting those preserved for the future. So we are capturing things in web archives that people might not expect us to capture. We're not capturing them in a way that they can do harm to our collections, but we are looking at how to collect and preserve computer viruses for the future, because they could be of lots of research interest.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. Anybody else want to bring anything up? I mean, we'll still keep an eye on the chat if anyone has anything. But Stella, go ahead.
I've got a question, I suppose, for Rhiannon with the 3D objects. So I'm pretty interested in 3D, and we've been doing some 3D scanning at the British Library ourselves. But I loved your leech jar with the leeches in. I was just wondering whether the Science Museum had worked with any kind of game studios or kind of partners to use some of the 3D objects in a kind of quite immersive way, or whether there was any plans to do that. Because I really personally feel a kind of a next stage forward with much of these kind of 3D objects is how we can use them. And I know from some of the kind of projects I've done with kind of game studios myself, I'm itching for some kind of collaborations with studios to see whether cultural heritage 3D items could be used in wouldn't it be great if they could be used in kind of mainstream games? But I just wondered whether the Science Museum had been doing anything like that.
So I'm now going to fail to be able to speak to that because my PhD research is based at the Science Museum, and I was keen to give a flavour of the different ways in which it digitizes its collection. But I actually can't speak, unfortunately, to how these are being used. I understand they're being used in teaching resources, but I actually don't know if they're being used in games. Although, actually, Gabby, this might be a question that you might be able to answer, which is, and perhaps for another week, which is, if something is uploaded to Sketchfab, is it then available for other people to use and say download into their game designs? Or
it could be, couldn't it? I mean,
okay.
you can set the permissions on it, and you can set the license on it when you upload. So some of them could be. There is, for example, we've put links, I think, on the session page to some suggestions for how to generate a IIIF manifest for a 3D model in Sketchfab, which isn't done automatically. But if you wanted to include a 3D model in, for example, the exhibit tool, there's a tool. I mean, I haven't tested it, but you could potentially. I mean, presumably there must be, it must work, because some 3D models were in those things that we saw. But no, so I don't know the answer to that question, but it is something that we can certainly talk about in week 9 of this. So in 5 weeks' time, when our session will be specifically on VR and gaming technologies for cultural heritage, where we'll have 2 people who know a lot about that sort of thing. So yeah, Andrew Reinhardt, who works on Archeo Gaming, and Corre, my colleague, Ferreira Contur, who works on VR for heritage. So that'll be something we can come back to for that question. And if you want to re-ask that question, then if it's not been answered already.
Yeah, apologies.
I was going to add to that. It will be the institution uploading to Sketchfab, deciding what they want to release the model as. So their permissions and rights department would decide what licensing they want to release the item, whether it's what flavour of Creative Commons or not. So that would be up to them. But I'd be interested in that session, and I'll be tuning in for that.
As well as licensing, the other issue, of course, is format. By default, if you say, I want this to be completely open and downloadable, what Sketchfab will make downloadable from your thing is effectively the 3D model, probably of sufficient quality for printing, but not of massive quality. I mean, but so there is a question then of, do you want to make higher resolution copies available? Do you want to make, include a link to an archived version, which is in resolution? Do you want to have, what metadata and paradata do you want to make available with your model? There may be things you want to make available that aren't in Sketchfab's normal data structure and so forth. So there's all sorts of other issues as well, if you want this to be something that is usable by people in gaming environments, for example. Yeah.
And I have a question about the exercise, just to clarify for Stella, maybe. The exhibit service only works with images for which IIIF manifest has been generated, right? It won't work with open access images.
That's my understanding. It's set to work with IIIF manifests. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. To clarify for students that want to try it, to make sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so the trick is to find collections that are IIIF enabled.
The trickiest, but also the most interesting bit, where you have to look for that and see the JSON and find the manifest link. I think that's really useful as well.
I guess if you wanted a more advanced exercise, you could build your own IIIF manifest and upload it somewhere for some existing open licensed images. But I'm not suggesting anyone try to do that in the next couple of days as an exercise on this. But it certainly, it's something one could look at if you wanted to do this, but with something you had a slightly wider range of materials available. Yeah. Great. We're sort of out of time. I was wanting us maybe to think a little bit about, and maybe this is a question that that the viewers can take away and think about for themselves, rather than that we'll answer at any depth. But sort of the intersect between some of what Stella and Rhiannon have been talking about and some of the ethical issues that Paula talked about, which is where we thought a lot about the legality of what we can archive, what we can share, what we can harvest, and what we can do with it. But there are all these other issues, as Paula said, above and beyond legality. There are things that leaving aside, there's obviously things that it is technically illegal to share, but it would be immoral not to share. And I'm sure we can all think of examples of that, but we're also none of us going to do it. We're going to make that claim through our professional work. But the reverse is certainly true. There's things it's perfectly legal to share, but actually probably shouldn't. And for very, very, very concrete reasons. And I wonder. Well, so one question is, what can we think of examples of that, and what would we do about it? And I guess the other question, which maybe we could have, a 5-word answer from each is do you do anything about that? Do you have tools or workflows in place to help answer any of those sort of questions?
Well, I could speak from my perspective, but I kind of also outline kind of the workflows that we have put in place to address those questions. But yeah, from us, because we are dealing with source communities and it is always their knowledge, we are just hosting it and giving access to it. It's like cultural sensitivities, as I said, are paramount, and it's them ultimately who have to decide what information is going to be accessible in the repository. And not only that, but also they have the right to withdraw their permission in the long term, and they have to remain accessible by us to stay in touch with them, and we have to be accessible to them in case they want to withdraw that right and that information. And I think that's really important, because it also speaks to the way in which this process is organic, in which we have to preserve the collections, but also we have to preserve the source community choices in terms of having them online or not.
In your case, I guess in your case, this is part of the metadata you collect, right? You don't ever collect anything that doesn't also have, is this stuff that'll be open, or is there a restriction on it next to each subset of that data? It's where someone's gathering data that doesn't necessarily have that. How do you make that decision? Because in your case, in some ways, I don't want to say it's made easy, but at least someone else is making that decision in part.
Yeah, I think that's for Stella and Rhiannon.
I can speak to it a bit from my research practice. So I'm looking at data from Twitter and Pinterest. So with Twitter, I only collected tweets that were @ing one of the museums or using a hashtag that was an official museum hashtag. So in that way, I was collecting tweets, although there were more public tweets that were mentioning the Science Museum or the Science Museum's, one of the museums, a collection object. The tweets that I did collect and that became part of the data set were only ones that were engaging in public conversations, so that we're expecting to be found outside of the feeds of people who follow that account. And then with Pinterest, all of the pages have to be publicly accessible. You don't need to sign in to see them. And any boards that have become private or deleted in the period of analysis are no longer included in the data set. So it's trying to think about what's publicly accessible of the collection objects that are then existing on these other social media platforms. But yeah, it's speaking to my own personal research.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Stella, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about whether you also think about what you should collect as well as what you're allowed to, or would that just be too big?
Yeah, because with the annual crawl, when you're talking petabytes and petabytes and petabytes, most of it is automatic. So there's a difference between the manual curated thematic collections that the curators are building with the ACT tool that I mentioned. They're very carefully selected and chosen and looked at. But the annual crawl, it's huge. It's probably the library's biggest digital collection. So it's but it's only available on site. What I should mention is researchers have to come and use the Legal Deposit Annual Crawl web archive in the reading rooms at the Legal Deposit libraries. So it's not like it's on the open web for anyone to use. It's kind of used in terminals on site. So that is a kind of restriction. With Legal Deposit, we collect everything that's published. So I'm just thinking, and what can be problematic at one time might not be problematic later. So I'm just thinking of a recent digitisation project to digitise the private case. So these were probably erotica and things that would have been censored. Often they have shelf marks that have cup at the start of the shelf mark, and it's because they were all locked in cupboards. So I just love this fact. It's like often if you consult a British Library item and it has a shelf mark starting CUP, it used to be locked in a cupboard and was restricted access. But now many of these things that were classified as that probably 100 years ago are definitely not seen in that way now. And like I say, there was a digitisation project to do the private case. So it's yeah, it is an issue of scale, but we have been thinking more and more of content warnings and how if we're making collections available online, and I'm thinking this wearing a kind of Wikipedia hat. So Rhiannon, you mentioned working with Wikimedia, and we also have a Wikimedian in residence at the British Library, and we have been discussing like is it useful, or should we be thinking about content warnings for some types of items and collections? And we've been having discussions with other institutions, including Wellcome. So I think there's lots of debate to be had in this area. But from the collections I've been mostly talking about today with Legal Deposits, it's just collected at such bulk. It's harder to do that. With the Born Digital Personal Archives, that's very much working with the depositor, whether it's the if the person's still alive and it's their archive, or it's their estate and usually their family. But again, these collections, we're looking at making them available reading room, so manuscripts reading room on site only, and there would be a lot of kind of sensitivity review. So I mentioned that we use forensic tools to make sure that we're not, say, providing access to any sensitive information. But trying to develop tools to do this is a kind of priority area at the moment.
Yeah.
And what about things like the dark web or like not legal websites?
That's not no, the dark web. It's like we literally crawl the open web. We're not going and we're not so I mentioned we're collecting viruses, but we're not collecting the dark web.
You mentioned viruses, so I was like, do they collect other things similar to that?
That would be fascinating, but no, like I say, we're not at the moment.
And in terms of logistics, how does the British Library keep a collection like this? Because I imagine the preservation is intended to be forever. You aim to preserve these collections forever. So how does that work in terms of logistics? Do you have like a repository that grows every year, or?
Yeah, and there can be migrations to new repositories. So our digital preservation team look after this, but you're right, it's a really kind of complex task. That's why I mentioned kind of fixity checking and kind of checksumming. So you're right, it's important that kind of our digital preservation team set up workflows and kind of tools to check our collections, because you're right, we aim to collect for we say for perpetuity. So Legal Deposit collections are for perpetuity, but it's hard to kind of imagine what perpetuity means with digital. So it really is kind of thinking long term, but having to recognize that that we might like you say have to migrate to new repositories. It's not a field that stands still, and standards move with time. So I'm just thinking with like the early digitization projects. So I mentioned IDP, so material digitized in the 90s, but other early digitization projects, we try not to re-digitize the same items over time, but obviously camera standards change, and so there are cases where we do re-digitize, but yes, it's our digital preservation colleagues and the digital preservation community have got a Herculean task trying to ensure that we try to future-proof things, because the challenge is digital preservation is always running to catch up. So especially with emerging formats where you might have people working with interactive and cutting edge techniques sometimes, and digital preservation is then trying to kind of catch up, and even globally it is quite a small niche research community. So yeah, many issues.
I've always thought it's really interested, like what gets digitized when and how, and especially if you've got massive collections which involve like thousands of objects. It's like what got digitized to what standard when, what's been read. It's like a really interesting contextual thing about what is perceived to be interesting at that moment, and almost I just find it really interesting, like over like the quality or when something gets digitized as it's ongoing.
Often it's finding, it's often, this is not to be too pragmatic or depressing, it's often who will pay for the digitization. So, but you're right, that is very, very interesting, kind of looking at why collections have been digitized, but certainly it can be challenging to get money to do digitization, and often it can be from commercial partnerships. So I mentioned the British Newspaper Archive. One of the reasons that we've digitized so many newspapers is because of ongoing long-term partnerships with Find My Past and kind of organizations like that. So you're right, it is interesting to kind of track back and look at the history of digitization, but I know certainly from my experience, often is there a commercially viable product sometimes, or who will pay for the digitization? Sometimes it will be philanthropic funding, but it can be harder to get that type of funding to digitize.
It's interesting either way. That's contextual what's going on.
Absolutely.
Another question to maybe, sorry, Stella, adding more complexity to the discussion, but you mentioned the web archive. Is that only for the UK, or does it archive other webs? Because in other parts of the world, because then we can go into the discussion of what do we archive and what do we decide to keep for future generations to preserve for the future. Is just us? Is our perspective? Or
so the UK Web Archive archives literally UK legal deposit, but Trinity College Dublin is a UK legal deposit library. It's one of these anomalies that so National Library of Ireland, I understand, do their own web archiving, but Trinity College Dublin are an Irish partner in the UK Web Archive, but we are collecting essentially the UK web. But there is an international consortium of web archives who do a lot of collaboration. They have an annual conference, and so they do work together, and it can be quite interesting in sites that have been kind of crawled by different types of archives, comparing the captures, and there is a lot of kind of interest. An example that I often used to use was when the Conservative Party deleted their speech archive from their website several years ago. They just deleted all their speeches. We'd got it in the UK Web Archive. We'd got a pretty good capture of the speeches, and I think one other web archive had got them as well, but it was because with our web crawling we don't delete, and how they'd been deleted on the live site, something sneaky had been done to I think delete cached versions or something like that. So some web archives they haven't managed to capture because of how the changes to the website, but it didn't affect our one. But you're completely right. It is interesting to kind of compare captures and crawls, but like I say, with the UK Web Archive, we just crawl the UK web. Trying to identify what is a UK website is a whole other talk for another event. I probably shouldn't go into that, but my colleagues in the Web Archive do often talk about that.
Yeah. yeah, we could almost have another session on this topic. I mean, well, we easily could, and it wouldn't be long enough. But we've definitely run out of time now. We've overrun by 15 minutes. So thank you, all three of you, for your contribution and for sticking around for so long. And thanks to the audience for sticking around as well. Do join us again next week for the session on 3D modeling, if I remember correctly. Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.